The room went quiet the way a room goes quiet right before something breaks. I was standing near the bar at the Barrow Country Club in Austin, holding a glass of bourbon I hadn't touched in 20 minutes, when my wife's voice cut through the noise of 80 guests celebrating her father's 60th birthday. "Honestly, at this point I just tell people he's between projects," Natalie said, laughing, her hand resting on her cousin's arm. "It sounds better than, my husband's company is circling the drain." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel exactly. It was worse than cruel. It was casual. The kind of laughter that comes from people who've already decided you're not worth taking seriously anymore. I didn't move. I didn't set my glass down harder than I needed to. I stood there in a charcoal suit I'd had tailored 2 years ago when Marlowe Development was breaking ground on its first mixed-use tower, and I let my wife tell 40 strangers that I was a failure, on the same day that I had wired confirmation, sitting in my inbox, unread, that I had just closed the largest deal of my career. $40 million. Signed at 4:52 that afternoon. She didn't know. Nobody in that room knew. That was the entire point. My name is Derek Marlowe. I'm 39 years old. I run a real estate development firm out of a converted warehouse on East 5th Street in Austin, Texas, and 11 hours before my wife stood in front of her father's country club friends and called my company a sinking ship, I had finished the single most complicated negotiation of my life, an 8-month, entirely silent acquisition that nobody, not my wife, not her family, not most of my own staff, was allowed to know about until the ink dried. I want to tell you what it feels like to stand in a room and let the people who love you humiliate you because they think you have nothing left to lose. And I want to tell you what happens when they find out how wrong they were. But before I get to the country club, before I get to the laughter and the glass in my hand and the number sitting unread in my phone, let me tell you how a guy from a 2-bedroom rental in Round Rock ended up married into the kind of family that measures a man's worth by the car he drives into their driveway. Part 1. Before I knew what I was marrying into. I grew up outside Austin, in a house my dad built himself, literally, with his own hands, over 11 years, adding a room whenever he'd saved enough to do it right. He was a general contractor. Not the kind who runs a company with his name on a truck door and 40 employees. The kind who shows up alone with a toolbox and does the work himself because he trusts his own hands more than anyone else's. He taught me 2 things that ended up mattering more than anything I learned in college. The first was that a foundation you can't see is more important than a facade everyone can. The second was that the loudest person in a negotiation is almost always the one who's about to lose it. I studied finance at UT Austin, worked construction summers to pay for it, and graduated with a degree and about $4,000 in savings. I spent my 20s doing the unglamorous work of learning real estate from the ground floor, literally. Site surveys. Permit applications. Sitting in city council meetings until midnight, watching how zoning decisions actually got made instead of how people assumed they got made. By 29, I had enough saved and enough relationships built to option my first piece of land, a half-acre lot near the East Austin corridor that everybody else considered worthless because it sat behind a defunct rail yard. I saw something in it. 6 months of permitting fights later, I built an 8-unit residential project that sold out before the final inspection. That was the beginning of Marlowe Development Group. By 34, I had 12 employees, a growing reputation for taking on land nobody else wanted and making it work, and a company that had done just over $60 million in completed projects. I wasn't a headline name. I wasn't the kind of developer who got profiled in business magazines. But in the rooms that mattered, banks, city planning offices, institutional buyers, people knew the name Marlowe and knew it meant the work would get done right, on budget, without drama. That was the man Natalie Prescott met at a fundraising gala for the Austin Children's Museum 5 years ago. She was 31, sharp, funny in a way that caught you off guard. And she came from the kind of family that didn't just have money, they had the specific Texas confidence that comes from 3 generations of never once wondering if the check would clear. Her father, Walter Prescott, owned a chain of specialty auto dealerships across central Texas and sat on the boards of 2 banks. Her mother ran a boutique interior design firm that mostly designed the houses of people she already knew socially. I fell for Natalie the way you fall for someone when you've spent your whole life building things brick by brick and you meet someone who makes you believe the building was worth it. She asked good questions about my work. She listened when I explained why I liked ugly land other developers overlooked because they couldn't see past what it currently was. You see what things could be instead of what they are, she told me once, early on, and I remember thinking that was the most accurate thing anyone had ever said about me. We got married 2 years later at a vineyard outside Fredericksburg. 160 guests. Her father gave a toast that mentioned, twice, how proud he was that his daughter had found someone who worked with his hands, in a manner of speaking. I let it go. New father-in-law jokes, I told myself. That's all it was. It wasn't all it was. It was the first sentence of a story the Prescotts had already decided to tell about me, and over the next 4 years, they never stopped telling it. Part 2, The Slow Math of Being Underestimated. Here's something nobody tells you about marrying into money you didn't grow up with: it isn't the wealth that gets to you. It's the certainty. The Prescotts had never once, in their entire lives, had to wonder if a deal would fall through, if a bank would call a loan, if a project would stall for 18 months because a city council member decided to grandstand on a zoning variance. They had never lived with risk the way I lived with it every single day of running my company. And because they'd never lived with it, they couldn't recognize what it looked like when someone was managing it well instead of losing to it. For the first 2 years of our marriage, Walter Prescott asked me exactly one question about my business, at exactly one family dinner: so when are you going to build something people have actually heard of? I laughed it off. Natalie laughed it off too, back then, the way you laugh off things when you still believe your spouse is fundamentally on your side, just surrounded by people who don't get it. The shift started about 1.5 years ago, when I began the East Austin land assemblage. Here's what most people don't understand about development at scale: the biggest deals in real estate are built in silence, sometimes for years, before anyone outside a small circle of lawyers and bankers ever hears about them. I had identified 14 contiguous parcels along the eastern corridor: old industrial land, a shuttered printing plant, 2 vacant lots, a handful of aging single-tenant buildings, that, if assembled quietly and entirely, could become one of the largest mixed-use redevelopment sites in the city. The kind of project that changes a neighborhood's trajectory for 30 years. The problem with an assemblage like that is simple: if word gets out that someone is trying to buy 14 parcels in the same 6-block radius, every seller suddenly wants triple the price, every competitor tries to jump the deal, and the entire project collapses under its own visibility. So you do it quietly. You do it through shell entities and separate closings and lawyers who never mention each other's names. You do it slow, patient, and invisible, and you tell almost nobody, because the moment it's not invisible anymore, it's dead. Which meant that for 14 months, my company looked, from the outside, like it was quietly falling apart. I stopped taking on new smaller projects to conserve capital for the assemblage. I let 2 positions go unfilled after employees left, not because I couldn't afford them, but because I needed every available dollar moving toward land acquisition instead of overhead. I moved my office out of the nicer space on Congress Avenue into the converted warehouse on East 5th, which looked, to anyone driving by, like a company downsizing out of desperation instead of a company redirecting capital into the most important project of its existence. I couldn't explain any of this. Not to Natalie. Not to her family. Not even fully to most of my own staff, who only knew pieces. The deal was bound by NDAs so tight that even my accountant only saw fragments of the full picture. I had learned, over 15 years in this business, that the developers who talk about their deals before they close are the developers who watch their deals fall apart. So I said nothing, and I let the silence do exactly what silence always does when nobody's filling it with the truth: I let people fill it with their own story instead. And the story the Prescotts told themselves was that Derek Marlowe had finally hit the ceiling of his talent. It started small. Comments at dinner about whether I'd thought about getting back into something more stable, maybe project management for one of the bigger firms. Walter forwarding Natalie a local Business Journal article, one of those short blurbs that runs when a company's headcount shrinks, the kind of piece with no real reporting behind it, just a note that sources say Marlowe Development has scaled back operations amid what insiders describe as cash flow difficulties. I never found out who the insiders were. I suspect it was a disgruntled former employee with a grudge and half the picture. Natalie started asking questions with an edge to them that hadn't been there before. Not how's work, but are we going to be okay financially? Not tell me about the project, but should I be worried? I told her, every time, the same thing, trust me. I know what I'm doing. I can't explain the details right now, but I need you to trust me the way you did when we got married. She said she did. For a while, I believed her. But trust, I've learned, is a lot like capital. People will tell you they have plenty of it until the moment they're actually asked to spend some, and then you find out how much was really there. Part 3, The Gala. Walter Prescott's 60th birthday was, by design, the social event of the Prescott family's year. 200 guests eventually, though only about 80 had arrived by the time the mockery started. Barrow Country Club, string quartet, a raw bar that probably cost more than my first development's entire permitting budget. Natalie had spent 6 weeks planning it with her mother. I had spent that same 6 weeks in a conference room in downtown Austin with 4 attorneys, finalizing the purchase and sale agreement with Cordell Bay Partners, a Dallas-based institutional real estate fund that had, after 8 months of quiet diligence, agreed to acquire the full 14-parcel East Austin assemblage for $41 million. The final signature had gone down at 4:52 that afternoon. Wire confirmation would hit my company's account first thing Monday morning. I had walked into the gala 3 hours later with my phone in my jacket pocket, the confirmation email sitting unread, choosing, deliberately, not to say a word to anyone yet, because the deal wasn't fully public until Cordell Bay's own PR team cleared the announcement, and because some part of me, honestly, wanted one quiet evening before the entire trajectory of my company changed in a way that would follow me into every conversation for the rest of my career. I did not get a quiet evening. I was at the bar when Natalie's cousin Whitney, a woman I'd exchanged maybe 40 words with in 5 years of marriage, asked me, in front of 6 other people, how the business thing was going. It's going well, I said. Which was, at that exact moment, the single greatest understatement I had made in my adult life. Whitney raised an eyebrow, glanced at Natalie, and said, "That's not what I heard." "What did you hear?" I asked, and I want to be clear that I asked it evenly, not defensively. I was curious what version of my company had been circulating through the Prescott social circle for the last year. "Just that things have gotten tight," Whitney said, choosing the word with visible care, the way people choose words when they're enjoying themselves. "Layoffs. The office move. My dad said one of the banks pulled a line of credit." None of that last part was true. No bank had pulled anything. But I understood, in that moment, that the story had grown well past what had actually happened, the way stories always do when the person at the center of them refuses to correct the record. "Things are fine," I said. "Better than fine, actually. And this is the part one still turn over, months later. This is the part that changed something permanent in me." Natalie laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not an uncomfortable laugh meant to smooth over an awkward moment. A real one, easy and familiar, like she'd been waiting for someone to open the door on this conversation for a while. "Derek, it's okay," she said, touching my arm in a way that was meant to look affectionate and instead felt like being patted on the head. "You don't have to keep pretending everything's great. Everybody here already knows." "Knows what, exactly?" I asked. "That it's been rough," she said, and then, turning slightly toward the small crowd that had gathered near us, added the sentence that I will remember for the rest of my life. "Honestly, at this point I just tell people he's between projects. It sounds better than, my husband's company is circling the drain." The laughter that followed was soft. Polite, even, by country club standards. Whitney laughed. A man I didn't recognize, one of Walter's dealership partners, laughed and said something about the market being brutal for guys doing it solo. Not everyone's built for that kind of risk. Walter, standing a few feet away with a scotch in his hand, didn't laugh, but he didn't stop it either. He watched, the way you watch something you've already decided is entertainment. Natalie's mother, Carol, said, gently, as if she were being kind, "You know, Derek, there's no shame in going back to working for someone else for a while. Stability matters too." I looked at my wife. I looked at the woman who, 5 years ago, told me she loved that I could see what things could be instead of what they currently were. And I understood, standing in that room with a glass of untouched bourbon in my hand, that she had stopped seeing what I could be a long time before that night. She had simply stopped telling me. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because I think people assume a man who doesn't react isn't feeling anything, and that has never once been true for me. I felt something close to grief, actually, more than anger. The grief of realizing that the person who was supposed to know you best had built an entire private narrative about your failure and was comfortable enough with that narrative to perform it publicly, in front of strangers, without ever once asking you directly if it was true. I didn't correct her. I want to be very clear about that, because I know how the story sounds if I tell you I calmly pulled out my phone right there and showed everyone the wire confirmation. That's not what happened. That's not who I am, and honestly, it's not what the moment deserved. A $41 million acquisition isn't a rebuttal you deploy at a birthday party to win an argument. It's not a trophy. It's the result of 8 months of careful, silent work, and I wasn't going to cheapen it by turning it into a mic drop moment for an audience of people who'd already decided who I was. "I'm going to get some air," I said. I set the untouched bourbon down on the bar, and I walked out onto the country club's back terrace, alone, into the warm Texas evening, and I stood there for 11 minutes looking out over a golf course I didn't care about, thinking about the 14 parcels of land I had spent 14 months quietly assembling while my wife told her family I was falling apart. I didn't confront Natalie at the party. Confrontation without control is just noise, and I had learned a long time ago, from watching my father negotiate contractor disputes with his voice never once rising, that the person who stays calmest in a room is almost always the person who ends up controlling what happens in it. We left the gala around 11. The drive home was silent except for Natalie mentioning, once, that she thought the party had gone well. I didn't respond. I don't think she noticed the silence had changed shape. When we got home, I told her I had some emails to catch up on, and I went into my home office, closed the door, and opened my laptop. The wire confirmation was still sitting there, unread since 4:52 that afternoon. I read it now. $41,400,000, less closing costs and the payout to my 2 silent equity partners on the deal, netting Marlowe Development Group just under $29 million in proceeds, with the remaining $12 million structured as a continuing minority stake in the redevelopment as it moved forward under Cordell Bay's ownership. It was, by a wide margin, the most significant transaction of my career, and it had closed roughly 10 hours before my wife told a room full of her family's friends that I was a man who couldn't hold a business together. I sat with that for a while. Then I made 3 calls. The first was to Reyes Calloway, my attorney, who had handled every major transaction Marlowe Development had done for the last 6 years. She picked up on the second ring, which told me she'd guessed something was wrong. "Derek. It's almost midnight. Everything okay with Cordell Bay?" "The deal's fine. Wired, signed, done. I need you to start something else." "What?" "I want you to prepare a separation filing. Not urgent, but I want it ready by Monday." There was a pause on her end, the kind of pause that told me she understood exactly what she was hearing, even though I hadn't explained anything yet. "Talk to me," she said. I told her about the party. Not with any drama in my voice, I just laid it out the way I'd lay out a project timeline. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the reasons I've trusted her for 6 years. "You know I have to ask," she said when I finished. "Is this the deal talking, or is this real?" "It's real," I said. "The deal just happened to be the thing that made it undeniable." Okay, she said. I'll have papers ready by Monday. What about the Cordell Bay announcement? You want that held until after you've talked to her? I thought about that for a moment. No, I said. Let it run on schedule. She can read about it like everyone else does. The second call was to my business partner, Alonzo Reyes, no relation to my attorney, just a coincidence of surnames in a city with about 900,000 people and apparently only 40 last names worth having. Alonzo had been my second hire at Marlowe Development 11 years ago and was now my head of acquisitions, the only other person besides me and Reyes Calloway who knew the full shape of the East Austin deal. I told him what had happened. He was quiet for a second, and then he said something I've thought about a lot since. Man, they've been telling that story about you for a year and you never once corrected it. I always wondered why you let it run. Because correcting it before the deal closed would have killed the deal, I said. You know that. I know the business reason, Alonzo said. I'm asking about the other reason. I didn't have a good answer for that one that night. I do now, and I'll get to it. The third call was to my father. Ray Marlowe is 68 years old. He still does the occasional small job, a deck here, a kitchen remodel there, not because he needs the money but because he doesn't know how to be a person who isn't building something. He picked up on the fourth ring, groggy, the way anyone would be at midnight. Derek. Everything okay? I told him. All of it, the deal, the party, Natalie's laugh, the silence I'd kept for 8 months, the paperwork I'd just asked Reyes to draft. He didn't say anything for a long time. Long enough that I checked to see if the call had dropped. Then he said, "You remember the Holbrook job? The renovation out past Manor, the old farmhouse." I did remember it. I was maybe 15, tagging along for the summer. That foundation was cracked in 6 places when we started, my father said. Took us 3 weeks just on the foundation before we touched anything anybody could see. Homeowner's brother came by every few days telling her she'd hired the wrong guy, said it looked like nothing was happening, said she should cut her losses. She almost fired me twice. You remember what I told you back then, about why I never argued with him? You said the work speaks eventually. Arguing with a man who can't see underground just wastes breath you'll need later. That's right, he said. Doesn't mean it doesn't hurt to hear it, though. Being underestimated by someone who's supposed to trust you, that's a different kind of tired than being underestimated by a stranger. What do I do, Dad? You already did it, he said. You built the foundation without needing anyone's permission to believe in it. Question now isn't about the business. Question is whether you want to keep building anything with people who only trust what they can already see. I want it to be clean, I told him. I don't want this to turn into a mess. Then keep doing what you did tonight, he said. Don't raise your voice. Don't make it a performance. Let the paperwork say what you don't have to. I stayed up until nearly 2 in the morning after that call, not doing anything in particular. Just sitting in my office, looking at a wire confirmation for $41 million, thinking about how strange it was that the biggest win of my career had arrived on the same day as the clearest confirmation that my marriage had already ended, quietly, months before either of us said the word out loud. Natalie found me in the office around 1:30. She'd changed out of her party dress into pajamas, and there was a softness to her that had been entirely absent a few hours earlier at the club. You've been in here a while, she said. You okay? I'm fine, I said. You didn't say much on the drive home. No, I didn't. She sat down in the chair across from my desk, the same chair where, 4 years earlier, she used to sit while I explained zoning variances to her over wine, back when she still asked follow-up questions instead of just tolerating the answer. I know the party got a little rough, she said. I didn't mean anything by what I said. It's just, you know how my family is. I was trying to keep things light. You told a room full of people my business was circling the drain, I said. My voice was level. I want to be clear about that, because I think it matters. I wasn't performing calm. I actually was calm, in the way you're calm after you've already made the decision and you're just walking through the confirmation of it. I was joking, she said. Was Whitney joking? Was your father joking when he watched it happen and said nothing? She didn't have an answer for that. Natalie, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Do you actually believe my company is failing? She hesitated. That hesitation told me more than anything she said afterward. I believe something's been off for over a year, she said finally. You stopped explaining things to me. You moved offices. People let go. My dad kept sending me articles. I didn't know what else to think, Derek, because you wouldn't tell me anything. I told you to trust me. Trust isn't a blank check, she said, and there was an edge coming back into her voice now, the same edge that had been there for months. You can't just say, trust me, for over a year and give me nothing to actually hold on to. I'm your wife. I'm allowed to be scared about our finances. You weren't scared tonight, I said. You were performing for your family. There's a difference, and you know there's a difference, because I've watched you be genuinely scared about things before, and it doesn't look like a punchline at your father's birthday party. She looked down at her hands. What was I supposed to think, she said quietly, when you wouldn't tell me anything? You were supposed to think of the last 11 years, I said. You were supposed to think about the 8-unit project everybody said was worthless land, and the 11 employees, and the $60 million in completed work before you and I ever met. You were supposed to extend me the same faith you extended me the night I proposed, when I told you I didn't have much saved yet but I had a plan. Instead you extended it to a rumor in a business blog written by someone who didn't even bother to call me for comment. She was quiet for a long moment. So what happens now, she said. With the marriage? I've already called Reyes, I said. She's preparing a separation filing. You'll hear from her Monday. Natalie's head came up sharply. That's it? You're not even going to try to talk this through? I tried to talk it through 11 months ago, I said. I told you I couldn't share details but that I needed your trust while I worked through something big. You gave me that trust for about 6 months, and then you started giving it away to your father's dinner table instead. I'm not angry that you had doubts, Natalie. Doubts are human. I'm not even angry that you were scared. I'm telling you what's ending because of what you did with the doubt. You turned it into a performance for an audience, at my expense, in the same week I was closing the biggest deal of my career, and you did that without ever once picking up the phone and asking me directly if I was okay. What deal, she said. Her voice had changed. Something in her had gone very still. I looked at her for a moment. Then I turned my laptop screen toward her and let her read the confirmation herself. I watched her face while she read it. I watched the exact moment the number registered, $41,400,000, and I watched something complicated move across her features. Not joy. Not relief, even. Something closer to horror, the specific horror of realizing you performed your husband's humiliation in front of 80 people on the same day he became more successful than he had ever been in his life. This closed today, she said. It wasn't a question. 4:52 this afternoon. You knew. At the party. You knew this whole time and you just stood there and let me. Yes, I said. I let you, because it wasn't finished being real yet, the announcement wasn't cleared, and honestly, Natalie, even if it had been, I wasn't going to pull out a wire confirmation at your father's birthday party like a magic trick to win an argument. That's not what 15 years of work is for. It's not a rebuttal. It's just the work. Derek, I am so sorry. If I had known. That's the problem, I said gently, because I did feel something gentle underneath everything else, even then. You shouldn't have needed to know the number to treat me with basic respect. You should have extended me the benefit of the doubt because you're my wife, not because I hit a number big enough to force it out of you. She started crying then, and I want to be honest that it didn't move me the way it might have a year earlier. Not because I'm cold. Because I understood, with total clarity, that some of those tears were about the marriage and some of them, if I'm being fair to both of us, were about the number. "Please don't do this," she said. "We can fix this." "I'm not trying to punish you," I said. "I want to be really clear about that, because I know how this looks from the outside. I'm not filing because I want to hurt you or take something from you. I'm filing because I spent 14 months building something extraordinary in complete silence, trusting that the people closest to me would extend me grace in the absence of information, and the person I trusted most turned that silence into a story about my failure the second it became socially convenient. I can forgive a lot of things. I don't think I can build a life with someone who needed a $41 million receipt to believe in me." She didn't have anything to say to that. I don't think there was anything to say. Reyes filed the separation paperwork Monday morning, the same morning Cordell Bay Partners issued a formal press release announcing the acquisition. It ran in the Austin Business Journal by Tuesday afternoon, the same publication, incidentally, that had run the vague, sourceless blurb about my company's cash flow difficulties 11 months earlier. This time the headline read, "Marlowe Development Group closes $41.4 million sale of East Austin assemblage to Cordell Bay Partners in one of city's largest land deals of the year." I didn't send it to anyone. I didn't need to. Walter Prescott called Natalie within the hour, and Natalie called me 40 minutes after that, her voice tight in a way I hadn't heard before. "My dad wants to talk to you," she said. "About what?" "He said there might have been a misunderstanding. He wants to have lunch." I let that sit for a second. "Natalie, I already filed. There's nothing your father and I need to discuss over lunch. He feels terrible about the party." "I believe that he feels terrible about the timing," I said. "I'm less sure he feels terrible about the substance. Those are different things." She didn't argue with that, which told me she already knew it was true. Over the following 2 weeks, the calls came steadily. Whitney texted an apology that read less like remorse and more like damage control, the kind of message people send when they're worried about their own reputation rather than the person they hurt. Walter left 2 voicemails, both about clearing the air, neither mentioning the words "I'm sorry." Carol sent a card. An actual physical card, the kind you'd send for a death in the family, which felt, honestly, about right, because something had died. I responded to none of it directly. I let Reyes handle the logistics of the separation, and I put my energy into the thing I'd always put my energy into when things got complicated, the work. The Cordell Bay deal changed the entire shape of Marlowe Development Group almost overnight. The $29 million in proceeds, combined with the continuing minority stake in the redevelopment, gave me the capital to do something I'd wanted to do for years but never had the resources for, build out a full in-house development team instead of contracting out half our projects, and go after 2 additional assemblage sites I'd had my eye on for a while, this time without needing to operate in total secrecy, because the market now understood exactly what kind of company Marlowe Development actually was. Alonzo made partner. I hired 11 people in 4 months, more than replacing everyone I'd let go during the quiet period. We moved into a larger space, not back to the shiny Congress Avenue address. I'd grown to like the honesty of the East Fifth warehouse, but we expanded it, took the adjacent unit, put our name on the door in letters you could actually read from the street. The divorce, when it finalized, was almost anticlimactic by comparison. Texas is a community property state, which meant Natalie was entitled to half of what was earned during the marriage, and I didn't fight that. I never once tried to shield the Cordell Bay proceeds or make the process ugly, because pettiness has never once made a person richer or freer, only smaller. What I did fight, and win, was keeping full ownership and control of Marlowe Development Group itself, the company, the brand, the ongoing projects, because Natalie had never worked a single day in it, never contributed to a single deal, and the judge agreed that equity built through years of my own labor, much of it before we even met, wasn't something to be divided just because we'd been married while some of it grew. My father came by the new office about 2 months after everything settled. He walked the space slowly, the way he walks every job site, running a hand along a support beam like he was checking the work even though it wasn't his to check. "Foundation held," he said, not looking at me. Foundation held, I agreed. I should mention my brother here, because he showed up in a way that mattered more than I expected. Marcus Marlowe is 35, runs a commercial HVAC company out of Pflugerville, and he drove down to my place the Sunday after the party without calling first, which is exactly the kind of thing our father would do. He didn't bring advice. He brought breakfast tacos and sat on my porch for 2 hours mostly in silence, which, if you've never had a sibling like that, is a specific kind of gift, someone who understands that showing up matters more than having something useful to say. You good? He asked eventually. I will be. You gonna tell me the number? 41-4. He let out a low whistle. And she stood up in front of the whole club and called you washed up the same day. Same day. He shook his head slowly. You know what gets me? You never once told her. Not even after. You could have pulled your phone out right there at the party and ended the whole thing in front of everybody who laughed. I thought about it, I admitted. For about 4 seconds. Why didn't you? I thought about how to answer that honestly. Because if I'd done that, the story becomes about the reveal. About me winning a room. And I didn't build 14 months of silent work so I could turn it into a party trick. The deal was never about proving anything to Walter Prescott's country club friends. It was about the work being right. The two things just happened to collide on the same night. Marcus nodded slowly. Dad's gonna love that answer. Dad already gave it to me first, I said, in different words. As for the Prescott side of the story, there was one more piece that resolved itself without any effort from me at all, and I think it's worth including because it's the part of this story where the universe does the thing you always secretly hope it will do, even though you know better than to count on it. The Business Journal reporter who'd run the original vague piece about Marlowe Development's cash flow difficulties reached out to me, weeks after the Cordell Bay announcement, asking for comment on a follow-up story about the deal. I agreed to a short interview, and somewhere in that conversation, she asked, almost as an aside, where the original tip about cash flow difficulties had come from, since her paper's editor had gotten some pushback about the sourcing after the acquisition news broke. I didn't name anyone. I didn't need to. But I later learned, through a mutual acquaintance in Austin's small commercial real estate circle, that the original insider quote in that first article had come from a junior loan officer at one of the banks Walter Prescott sat on the board of, someone who'd overheard a routine, entirely unremarkable line of credit review meeting, misunderstood the context completely, and repeated it to a friend at a dinner party as gossip, where it eventually made its way, through several more retellings, into a business reporter's inbox as a source familiar with the matter. The loan officer was let go a few months later, not over my situation specifically, but over a pattern of loose talk about confidential client matters that had apparently caused more than one problem for the bank. I didn't ask for that outcome. I didn't engineer it. It simply happened, the way things tend to happen when you let the truth take its time instead of rushing to defend yourself with noise. Marlowe Development Group closed out this past year having completed 4 projects and broken ground on 2 more, including the first phase of the East Austin site under our continuing minority partnership with Cordell Bay. Revenue for the year came in just under $94 million across the full portfolio of active and completed work. We're up to 26 employees. Alonzo runs acquisitions with full authority now, and I've started doing something I never had time for before, mentoring 2 younger developers coming up through the industry the way nobody really mentored me, because I remember what it felt like to be underestimated by people who couldn't see underground. I ran into Natalie about 8 months after the divorce finalized. I was having lunch on South Congress with a city council member about an upcoming zoning matter, and she was walking out of a boutique a few doors down. We saw each other at almost the same moment. She looked different. Not bad, necessarily, just smaller somehow, in the way people look when a version of themselves they'd built their whole identity around has quietly stopped being true. I later heard, through people we still had in common, that her father's dealership group had taken a real hit that year, nothing related to me, just a bad run of decisions on inventory financing right as interest rates climbed, and that some of the certainty the Prescott name used to carry around Austin had thinned out considerably. She'd moved out of the house they'd helped her and me buy years ago and was renting an apartment near the domain. "Derek," she said. "Natalie." There was a pause. Not a hostile one. Just a pause, the kind two people share when they used to know everything about each other's days and now know nothing at all. "You look well," she said. "I am well," I said, and I meant it in a way that had nothing to do with the deal or the money, though I understood she probably still heard it that way, at least partly. "I heard about the East Austin groundbreaking," she said. "It's really something, Derek. What you built there." "Thank you. I should have believed you," she said quietly. "Before all of it. I should have just believed you when you asked me to. I didn't have an argument to make about that. There wasn't one to make." "I appreciate you saying that," I said. "Are you happy?" she asked. "I'm building something I'm proud of," I said. "That's most of what happiness has ever been for me." She nodded slowly, like that answer confirmed something she'd already suspected. "Take care of yourself, Derek. You too, Natalie." And that was it. No dramatic final scene, no last word designed to wound. Just two people who used to build a life together, standing on a sidewalk on South Congress, choosing to walk in opposite directions. I've thought a lot, in the time since, about why that night at the country club affected me the way it did, and I don't think it was really about the money at all, even though the number makes for a better headline. It was about the specific loneliness of being underestimated by someone who was supposed to be your foundation. Strangers underestimating you is just Tuesday, if you're building anything worth building. You expect that. You build calluses for it. But when the person who shares your bed, who watched you option that first worthless-looking lot at 29, who told you she loved that you could see what things could become, when that person starts repeating the same story your critics tell, and starts telling it louder than they do, in front of